different things. All right, you'll come across that a lot, where people present you with a set of numbers and say it means one thing, and somebody else will look at those exact same numbers and tell you it means something else. So this is actually a part of this course I think is really good and really important. Today's a little dry. Today we kind of have to go through and talk about some definitions and things like that. That should take us about half the class, and then you'll do some work yourself. But then we're actually going to do some surveying and sampling and do some more advanced and more sort of meaningful statistics. Probably when you were in grade 9 in either business or maybe math, you had to go out and do some surveying. Did that happen? You remember that? Like, did you make surveys and then go around and annoy all the other classes by knocking on the doors? Yeah, we're going to do that again, though we're going to do it and be a little bit more clever in what we do with those statistics. We're going to be a little bit more advanced. But first and foremost, what does statistics mean? Anyone know? Stats. I mean, baseball players have stats, hockey players have stats. What do those words mean? Sorry? Yeah, absolutely. So it is analyzing numbers usually that you've collected to find trends or meaning. So statistics is about finding the meaning in numbers. Really, when push comes to shove. You look at a bunch of numbers, what does it mean? This can be the simplest thing in the world. If I give you a test back and you got 99 out of 100, that's just a number. What's the statistics of that? What does that number mean? You know what you're doing. That's right. You got 99 out of 100, you did great. If I give a test out and the class average is 90, that's another statistic, right? Big group of numbers. That means that the whole class knows what they're doing, right? So statistics is anytime we look at numbers and analyze them to find a trend or just to find out what they mean, what they tell us. Oh, yeah, you bet. There you go. You're welcome. So, with that in mind, there's 4 real steps to looking at the world around us and analyzing data. First things first, you have to have some kind of question. You have to have something you're interested in, right? So once we get that out of the way, and it could be as simple as, do I know my stuff with math, right? In which case you'd look at your mark. But once you know what you're talking about, the first step is to collect data. We have to collect data, and there's 2 basic ways we do that. The first way is what we call primary research. What's primary research? Have you ever heard that before? Maybe in history class, they've talked about primary sources. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it's the right idea. Primary research, you know for sure, because this is data you collect yourself. All right, so if I wanted to know, I don't know, about the pH of water in Welland, I could go out with my pH testing kit and I could go to the canal and take a sample, and I could find some ponds and take a sample, and I could go to the canal and take a sample, right? I said that first, didn't I? I could do it twice. But that is data you collect yourself. That's primary research. Now, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe somebody's already done that for me. And maybe I just want to like phone up, you know, the town of Welland and ask them if they have those numbers. And if they say they do, and I say, hey, can you send them to me? What do we call that? If this is primary research, very good. Secondary research is when you use someone else's data. And most of our research is secondary research, right? Anytime you read a newspaper, you're doing a kind of secondary research. Anytime you've had to do a report in school or anything like that, most often it's secondary. You're using somebody else's stuff. That's the first step. You have to get data. Analyzing it. Here is where we do all the math. And we won't get too much into it now, but what kind of math might you do? If you have a big bunch of data, say all of you write a test in a class, what's some of the math I might do? Yeah, so you could calculate percentages. That's the worst percentage sign anyone has ever drawn. You could find for percentages. I could take the whole class and do what with it? Often people want to know this. They get tests back. They go, oh, I got 80%. What is the? Yeah, I could find averages. I could find ranges, right? I might want to know who got the lowest mark. That's always what I want to know. Who got the highest mark? Things like that. So we collect our data, then we do all the math we need to do with it. Averages, ranges. We'll learn about a few other things over the course of this course, ways that we can look at numbers. Then, representing. It's just a fancy word. It's the word the textbook uses. So even though I don't give you a textbook, I used it. But this is where we might make tables, graphs, charts, maybe words. You might write sentences about it. But this is where we actually take that data and we put it into ways that are easy to understand. All right, if you give somebody just a big pile of numbers on a page, that's hard to follow. But if you turn it into a nice graph or a nice, you see now all the time on like Facebook and things like that, these like infographics, right? Where they take statistics, but they represent it as like pictures of people lined up and things like that. You know what I'm talking about? Infographics. I'll maybe find a couple examples later and put them up. And then the last step is interpreting, which means what? Yeah. Yeah, we're going to try to draw. Very good. Conclusions. What does it mean? And to use the example we talked about earlier, when I collect data, I might give you a test. To analyze that data, I might find your mark as a percent. This is a pretty lazy way, but how am I going to show that to you? I'm going to write that on your page. And then this last step, interpreting, would be what? So I give you a test, I figure out what your mark is, I write that down on the page, and then when I give it back to you, what does that number tell you? But it doesn't just tell you a number, it tells you, you said it earlier. If you have a high percentage, you'll know. Like if you had an 88, you're going to be like, yeah, I got this, I'm good. What if you got your test back and it was a 15%? You're going to be like, oh man, I did not know what I was doing. So now, like, you know how you're doing. I mean, I know that's like super casual language, but really that's what it's about. Once we've given you that information, that number gives you a sense of how you're doing. By the way, these steps make sense. I don't know about you, but especially like when I teach grade 9, you give them the test back and say it's like out of 48. And a kid gets like a 37 out of 48. And his first question is, what? 37 out of 48. What do they always want to know? What would you want to know?
What's my percentage?
Good, right? The first thing I'd say is, what's my percentage, right? I have to interpret that. I have to analyze it, represent it, and interpret in a way that'll make sense to me. 37 out of 48 doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not used to thinking of numbers that way, so I can't draw conclusions. They don't mean anything to me. Not really good ones anyway. I might be able to tell, okay, 37 out of 48, I definitely passed. I'm over half, right? But if I really want to be able to interpret that and really get a sense of how I'm doing, I'd want to put it as a percent, right? Because I know we have a really good sense of what like an 80% means, what 90% means. Whereas we don't have a good sense of what 37 out of 48 means versus 41 out of 48, right? Or at least I don't. That's not intuitive to me. Okay. I'm already talking too much. Now, for the first couple days, we're going to talk about the idea of primary research, if you're collecting your own data. And in science, we might collect data by doing an experiment, right? So we might actually have machines hooked up to measure. We might use equipment to measure. But we're going to talk more today about what if that information is about people, right? If we want to know how people feel about something or what they think about something, or any kind of information about people. To get that information from them, we usually have to ask. Yeah, we have to ask them. And if I want to know something, say, about Canadians, I want to know how Canadians feel about hockey. Am I going to ask every person in Canada?
Because I think you already have a good assumption in there.
Well, true enough. But if I did really want to do the survey, I'm not going to call every single person in Canada, right? Why not? I mean, it's obvious. It'd take forever, right? It would take forever, and it would cost a fortune. It would cost an absolute, because I'd have to hire thousands of people to sit there on the phone and call Canadians. So we don't do that. What we do when we collect data is we take samples. We take samples. So sampling is where we use a small number of people to represent a bigger group.
I know it's worth it's pretty years, right?
Yeah.
But just think about that. Use a small amount of people to calculate what the majority, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Think
And
how risky that is.
it is risky. And one of the neat things is for people who do this for a living, they spend a lot of time studying how many people do I have to ask to get reliable results that won't cost me millions of dollars. And it's a fine line. If you ask too few people, your results can be crazy. Because if you get a couple of people who have a strange thought on something, there's a really funny case of this where there was this poll in Los Angeles, or not in Los Angeles, in San Francisco in the last US election, where it's a different kind of poll. It's a neat idea. They had a group of 200 people, and they asked them who they were going to vote for. But every week they asked the same 200 people for 52 weeks leading up to the election. The idea was to see how the mood of the country would change. Makes sense, right? Well, when they came up with this group, they did it kind of randomly and some people dropped out. And by 6 weeks into it, they only had one African-American in the whole poll.
Oh my God.
So on the crosstab, and he happened to be a Trump supporter. Now, nationally, we know that only about 8% of African-Americans in the United States voted for Donald Trump. But in this poll, week after week after week, it showed Donald Trump has 100% of the support of the African-American community. Right? Was that accurate? No. It was way, way, way off. Actually, that wasn't San Francisco. It was the LA Times. That's right. It was Los Angeles Times doing this poll. So anyway, the point being, you're totally right. It's a dangerous thing. Now, in this sense, the population is the big group. It's everyone you're interested in. Everyone you want to know about. And that doesn't have to mean the population of the whole country. If I wanted to know about Eastdale students, then the population I'm talking about is people who go to Eastdale. If I wanted to know about grade 9s at Eastdale, then my population is just grade 9s at Eastdale. The population is the group you're interested in, the group you're asking about. But the sample is the actual group you collect data from. And I'm just going to put the word survey. You could even just say ask. The actual group you ask questions. That's a pretty crazy thing. I got a call the other day from a survey about the upcoming Ontario election, and I answered it. So whatever, it took 2 minutes, and I answered the questions. But I was curious. So then when the poll was published, I went and read it online, and they had a 7% response rate, which meant for every 100 people they called, only 7 people stayed on and answered the questions. It's a low rate, right? Look at me. I feel like a sucker. I'm like, oh, man, 93 people out of 100 are smarter than I am. But so that's kind of an interesting thing, right? And they asked 1,300 people, I think it was, these questions. And that 1,300 people are supposed to represent the whole province of Ontario. The crazy thing is, for the pollsters who are good at it, they're usually right within 2 or 3%. On average, they're about 3% off from real numbers when they do these things in predicting how people vote. So they're pretty good. They've found good ways to do this. And so that brings us to this. What's a good sample? If I've got this whole population, whatever it might be, maybe Eastdale students, maybe all of Canada, maybe all of Ontario, maybe Welland, whatever. If I have a population, how do I pick a good sample from that population? What should that sample look like? Maybe, but I mean, inactive people live in the community too. And
how do you draw no individual?
Yeah, I would say this. It's one that looks like, well, maybe you want people who don't care. Because that's part of the population too. A good sample is one that looks like the population. All right? If you are surveying in a population that is like 50% female and 50% male, which Canada is pretty close to that, but your sample is 90% male, 10% female, do you have a good sample? Yeah, but again, keep in mind, depending on what you're asking, you may really want to get the opinions of people who don't care too. That's important too, right? Maybe in my election thing, part of what they want to know is who isn't going to vote. That's important, right? Especially if you're a politician paying for that poll. I want to go after the people who are likely to go out and vote, and I kind of want to ignore the people who just aren't going to vote no matter what. So that's something I want to know about too. So it looks like the population. It's balanced, I would say, right? If the population's half male, half female, your sample should be half male, half female. Or you better take into account that it's not when you run your numbers. If your population is, like 70% white and 30%, like 20% native and 10% black, you better make sure that your sample represents those other people too. If your sample's 100% white, you're getting skewed data, right? If we were talking about surveying high schoolers, and I said I want to know about all high school students, but everyone in my sample is from grade 12 because I just surveyed a couple grade 12 classes. Do I have a good sample? No, and they want different things, right? Grade 12s just want to get the hell out of here. I mean, maybe grade 9s also just want to get out of here. I don't know. But especially by grade 12, if the question was, should we spend less money on prom and stuff this year so that we can do something better next year? Well, if you ask the grade 12s that, what are they going to say? No, because I'm not coming back, right? But if you ask just the grade 11s, they'll all say, yeah, you can spend more money on us. That's cool. Right? So if you want to get the mood of the whole school, you got to make sure your sample looks like the whole school. And if a sample doesn't do this, we say it's biased. So for example, if the population was 50% male, 50% female, which I think Canada's population is actually slightly more female than male. I looked these numbers up yesterday, but I think it comes close to being 51% female. And your sample was 20% male and 80% female. That's a biased sample. And within reason, we would say that a good sample is one that picks randomly. In other words, you're not surveying your friends, all right? Or you're not surveying just the people you know. So like not just your friends, not just your neighbors, Nothing like that. Everyone should have an equal chance of being picked. I want you to take a few minutes and suggest to me this. And you don't have to do this with like a calculator and get numbers super, super specific. I want just a rough guide where 15% of the population of Canada is under the age of 14, 15% is over the age of 65, and then everyone else, 70%, is between 15 and 65. And we're roughly 50% male and 50% female. So if I was going to pick 300 random Canadians, I kind of want to know, just take a minute and see if you can figure it out. Of those 300 people, what should they look like? And in my mind, I kind of see like, we have males, we have females, and then we have age brackets, right? What are the age brackets? Definitely. So if you've got to get to 300 people total, and again, you don't have to use a calculator. I'm not looking for decimal places here, but take a minute and fill this out. Roughly how many people of each would you ask to get up to 300? You work for a company, they want a sample of 300 people, and they want to be able to look at the difference between males and females and the difference between different age brackets. How do you break that up? You want a representative sample. But not out loud, it's on your sheet. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, take your time. Yeah, all the time you need. Oh, sorry, 14 and under. So I'm just putting under 15. I say under 14 in the sentence. Should have said 14 and under. Whoops. Sorry about that. Anyway, we're just talking roughly here, right? We're not building a piano. I love this stuff, by the way. If I were to go back to school today in 2017, I think I'd have studied statistics. I think that'd be a really neat job. Be the person who designs this kind of stuff. Big money in it, too, if this is stuff that interests you. Big money in statistics. Just still copying. Sorry. I get excited. What do you think? And now my problem with this is your sample now has equal amounts for all these ages, right? But are they equal in the population? Like I like that males and females are equal. But which group should, like, let's talk just males. Which group should be bigger and which group should be smaller? So maybe what could you do? Maybe instead of these both being 50. 20. Now that would be. Let's take 20 from that and go up to. And 20 from that and go up to. 90. So you can make that like 90, 30, 30. Like that's just one. You know what I mean? This group should definitely be bigger. Right? So don't erase that. Try it again over here. To the second time. So I just saw one example that I really liked, and it's a great start. It's on a good track. Which was this. And there's something I really like about this, and then there's something I think that we can make even a little bit better. So what do we think? Yeah, absolutely.
I put for between 50 to 65. I kept it 100, and I changed like the.
So like that?
Yeah, and I put 25, 25, 25, 25.
Oh, I like that.
I feel like with underage kids, it really shouldn't matter. Really, they really don't have too good of an opinion, right?
Sure.
They're not going to be backed up as much, and over 65, they're older than the sun, so.
Yeah, and there's less of them, right? 15% and 15%. Yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty good. Now, you could get even more precise. You could take a calculator out and work it exactly. I'm doing get nutso like that. Of course you did. What'd you get?
22.
So you did 22?
105.
105.
What, or 23.
Okay.
And then,
And the same here?
except on the top it was 23.
You switched them. Nice, so like that. Okay, so very good. So that's if you got a calculator and actually work the percentages out. That's awesome. But obviously your 125 is a good estimate, really good estimate. Nice. Does that make sense? We just want to make sure this was a great job of splitting male and female. We also want to make sure we split between the age groups, not necessarily evenly, but in proportion, right? If there's more 15 to 65-year-olds in Canada than there are people under 15, then when we poll, we want to make sure we poll more of them. We make them more weighted in our poll. Any questions about that? All right. So am I going too quick again? Again, I get excited. I do. I'm easily excited. So when we're done that, we're going to go to the next page and we're going to talk about the different ways you can sample. And then I'm going to shut up and you can do some work. But this is really interesting because when we balance, again, what would the best possible way to sample be? Like in a perfect world, if we really wanted to know something, we would just ask everybody. And there's a name for that. In fact, in Canada, we do that every, I should know this, every bunch of years we actually do this, where they actually, and they have to hire literally hundreds of thousands of people to do this, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. It is the census. And a census is actually any time you ask an entire population.
Is it the census every 20 years or 10 years?
I believe is it 10 years?
I think so.
I think you're right. Don't quote me. So you ask an entire population. So we do that in Canada to know main things like, how old are you? What is your ethnic identity? How do you identify ethnically? What's your religious identity, if you have one? What is your job? What do you do for a living? How many kids do you have? We ask all these things, and when all's said and done, they can use those statistics to talk about Canada on the whole, and they have a pretty good sense of that. They also use the census when they decide how big like different voting blocks will be, right? To make sure that people are represented roughly evenly in government and stuff. Did you guys talk about that in civics? Yeah? In that scintillating class civics that you must have been excited for every day? I think it's like the most interesting thing in school. When I took it in high school, it was dry. Then again, who teaches it here? Oh, so that'd be better. NEM2 would be a lot more interesting than my high school civics teacher was. I shouldn't say that. My high school civics teacher is a very nice guy, and now I feel guilty. If you're listening right now, Mr. Stevens, I'm sorry. No, I just mean it's recording right now. So, you never know. Maybe all these years, every time I teach a lesson, he's like, Orlando's teaching again. I better pay attention. Probably not. It depends. So when I have like a 4U chemistry class, kids often, even if they're present, will rewatch it because that stuff's pretty confusing. And so those average, I don't know, 20 to 30 views. And then like with this class, I have checked, but I bet 1, 0, I don't know. Probably 0 for a lot of them. I think 0 is a good bet. Maybe, I think when I plug it into this sheet, that counts as a view as far as YouTube sees it because somebody's linked to it. So I think probably 1. I think a lot of them get 1. But the thing is this, like, it doesn't take me any effort to do, so if one kid watches it, I had a weird one. It was just totally random. It was some lesson on molecular bonding in a grade 11 chemistry class, and it got like 8,000 views. This thing went like crazy. I don't know. Very strange. Yeah, who knows? I think I got like 7 cents from that. Though now YouTube has changed its monetization policy so that if you don't have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of views a year, you don't get any money. Yeah, they've upped the game.
And if you packaged in what you already
I know, yeah, you know, YouTube, I miss my 12-cent checks at the end of the year. Is that so much to ask? It's not actually a check, they direct deposit it, but the idea holds. I made 12 cents one year and I quite liked it. I was like, look at me, big time. If I did this for 20 years, I could buy a coffee. So anyway, so in a perfect world, going all the way down to the end, we'd do a census and we would just ask everybody. But that's not how we do things unless we have hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of people to do it. In fact, the exact opposite end of the spectrum is what we call a convenience sample. What do you think, based on the name, a convenience sample is? Yeah, it's easy. That's the whole idea. And so we usually just ask the people most easily available. And I want to relate all this to Eastdale, relate all this to our school. So if I was doing a convenient sample in Eastdale, I might ask my own class. Even though I want to know about everybody, I want to know about the whole school, I might just say, I'll just ask you guys. Probably not a very great sample because you guys all have a lot in common. You're all grade 11 students. You're all kids who've chosen to take grade 11 college math, not the university math, not the mixed math, not the essentials math, not the school to community math, right? Like you picked one specific stream and you all have that in common. So I'm probably not getting a great sense of everybody at Eastdale, right? I'm getting a good sense of kids kind of like you, and you have a lot in common. You're all roughly the same age. I could just like ask in the cafeteria at lunch, right? Like that's convenient. But again, if I ask in the cafe at lunch, am I getting a good cross section of everyone at Eastdale? Not people who drive, because they're probably not eating in the cafeteria, right? Sorry? Yeah, again, like we're not getting a great mix, right? But it's easy. And the point of a convenient sample is it's easy. I might just step into the hall and just ask out there. But again, I'm probably going to get different answers if I ask in the math science hall than if I asked next to the music room than I would if I asked next to the tech wing, right? So the problem is if I just step into the hall and ask in one place, it's convenient, but it's not very robust. It's not very accurate. Now, if I'm just looking for a quick, convenient thing to know, if I'm just kind of like, do high school kids watch, I don't know, I have no idea what high school kids, do high school kids watch Better Call Saul? I can just ask you guys, does anyone watch Better Call Saul? It's a great show. It's real good. Real good. Do you watch Breaking Bad? Like, everyone watch? Breaking Bad's so good. It's so good. So I quite like Better Call Saul. It's not as good, but it's quite good. Anyway, so there you go. I just did a quick, convenient sample. Do I have any, and I saw your face go. So that gave me a sense that we range from yes to what are you talking about, right? Okay. Oh, Noah's upset now. Look what you did. Yeah, like seriously? It's like the sequel. Well, it's actually a prequel. Seriously watch Breaking Bad. But just be aware that once you start it, you will consume it in like 17-hour stretches. Because yeah, it was bad for my sleep cycle until I got to the end of Breaking Bad. Now, voluntary sample. What do you think that is? Yeah. So this is people answer if they want to. By the way, these two might be related to one another, right? In a convenient sample like here, I just pulled all of you and basically you all answered one way or another. But I could also do a convenient sample where it's also voluntary. A good example of this is like online surveys, right? You know, where you get an email or you get a link or you go to a website and it says, click here to complete a survey. Does everyone who goes to the website complete the survey? No, it's voluntary. In fact, I'm sure most people don't, right? I worked in restaurants for years. What's the voluntary survey that we do at restaurants at the end of every meal? Yeah, you know, that little comment card, right? That's right, on a scale of 1 to 5. Some poor manager is like trying to make use of those numbers and be like, "Wow, this guy really hated us," or "This guy really." Comment cards. Listen, oh God, comment cards. If you manage a restaurant, they're like 80% of your life. You're like, oh, Jessica at table 15 didn't like her salmon. Had to send her an email. It was awful. It was like my life. But it's important, you know, and it even comes in other places like TripAdvisor. You know, if you're visiting somewhere, you probably want to see like, what did people think of this? You know, on Amazon, if you're looking at buying something, they have ratings, reviews, right? But they don't ask everybody. It's voluntary, right? Yelp. Yeah. So if you are a waiter, you have a collection of negative Yelp reviews about you. And my favorite one of all time, and sorry, I know I keep telling stories, but this is a good one. My friend Jay, he's a cop now, but for years and years and years, he was a waiter. So he went to film school. He got a degree in film, and he went to Toronto and tried to do the filmmaking thing, and it didn't work out for him. So then he went back to school to become a teacher. He hated it. So he finally went back to school to become an RCMP officer, which he is now. But the whole time he was doing all of these things, he was waiting tables. So from like 17 years of age to like 31 years of age. And I relate to that because I worked in restaurants until 31, until a couple of years ago. I used to leave school every night, go home, have dinner with the kids, and then get in the car and drive to work. So he did this forever. And by the end, when you get to like year 15 of a table waiting career, you're not especially enthusiastic about it. So Jay was my hero because I used to go, I'd meet him up at the end of his shift at work. So I'd go a little early and I'd sit there and my wife and I would have a bite to eat. And he'd turn and go to other tables and somebody would say like, hi folks, how are you tonight? And I'd go, oh, good, how are you? And he'd say, well, I'm 32 years old and I'm serving you food for a living, so I'm miserable. What can I get you a drink? So he was just the funniest, and he'd say it with a big smile and people usually laughed. But he kept on his like notepad that he kept at work, he would cut out and paste onto it all of his really negative Yelp reviews. And one of them said, the food was excellent, but I would never go back because the waiter was the rudest person I'd ever met. I asked how he was doing and he responded, miserable, but don't worry, it's your fault. This thought was really good. I'm miserable, but don't worry. It's your fault. Anyway, so these are voluntary samples, right? And it's even something as simple as, like, you go on Netflix and every movie has a star rating, right? But again, when you finish something on Netflix, do you have to rate it before you can move on? See, I actually think that'd be a good idea. That is infuriating. But in a way, like, if every time you watch something on Netflix, you had to give it a quick star rating before you could put the next video on, we might have a better sense of what people, because the problem with a voluntary sample is what two kinds of people are likely to fill out a voluntary sample? Okay, the very lonely. Okay, fair. But
people trying to get free stuff.
People trying to get free stuff. So yeah, but I would say too, let's assume that people aren't awful or lonely. If I go to a restaurant, I might want to fill out a comment card if my meal was really great. If it was really good, I might be like, that was exciting. I actually really enjoyed that meal. I'm going to fill out a comment card. Or I might fill out a comment card if my meal was really awful, if I had a terrible experience. If the waiter told me he was miserable, and then I found a hair in my food, and then when I told him there was a hair in my food, he said that he didn't care, right? Like, if I had a really awful dining experience, I'm probably going to fill out a comment card. Am I going to fill out a comment card if it was just kind of meh? Probably not, right? So the problem with a voluntary sample is you kind of tend to get either people who really care about the thing, one way or the other, but you tend not to get people who feel kind of neutral. But sometimes we care about the neutral people, right? I know from working in a restaurant, from managing it, that like the 10% who really love it are great, and the 10% who hate it that's a problem, you want to deal with it. But most of your customers they just had lunch, right? Like it didn't make them want to like go carve something in marble. They just had lunch. But they're the opinions that you really need to know about, right? And they're not the type of people who do this. In a school, what could that look like? How could you do a voluntary survey at Eastdale? Well, we could give a whole class a survey. That's optional. Right, I could go into a class and I could say, hey, here's a survey. Do you mind giving one to everyone in your class? They can fill it out if they want. They don't have to if they don't want to. Right? Well, probably. You usually get one or two. Okay. And these two are these are pretty weak. This is not great surveying. It works, does the job, but we don't listen. I used to collect comment cards, and I mostly collected them to get email addresses. And so if people gave us a perfect rating, I could shoot them a quick email saying, hey, heard you thought we were perfect. Do you mind reviewing this on TripAdvisor? Here's the link. Come in for the free wine tasting. And then people go, oh, that was nice. And they click the link and they give us a good review on TripAdvisor. And then your reviews on TripAdvisor go through the roof, right? But did I think that our comment cards were giving us really good, accurate data about the average person who came to our restaurant? No, I didn't trust them that way, because I know that it's not a good surveying technique, right? You can't pay people for reviews, but you can ask them for reviews. That's allowed. You can't offer them like money or something.
Also advertising.
Yeah.
It's like you go to a coffee shop sometimes, it's like world's best cup of coffee.
And then it's not.
It's a lie.
Like in the movie Elf, right? That's like world's greatest cup of coffee. It's like, congratulations. That's amazing. You must be so proud. All right, and now we get into better methods. The kind of gold standard is random, right? So what's a simple random sample? The simplest random sample is, I want to survey people, but if there's 1,000 people in the school and I want to ask 100, how do I pick which 100 people I ask? The randomest thing, the most random thing would be take all those 1,000 names, stick them in a hat, and pull 100 out, right? So sort of pulling names out of a hat. Now, in 2018, do I have to do this with a hat and slips of paper? I mean, by the way, but we can use computers, right? Computers can pick randomly. So I could put the name of every student in the school into a computer program and say, computer, pick 100 random names. And instead of me pulling them from a hat, the computer does the same thing digitally. This is kind of the gold standard. This is kind of basic surveying. And literally, I mean, example at Eastdale, pull names from a hat. You don't have to write this twice necessarily, because that's kind of wasteful. But that is the most random thing you can do. Put every single student's name in a hat, pull them out. Oh, Ferguson, Michaela, there's one. And then, oh, there's a grade 9, oh, there's a grade 12. And you just pull them randomly out. And in theory, this should be a good representative sample, right? Now, it's still not perfect. And by the way, you still have to have a pretty big sample, all right? If I only pulled 3 names, am I going to get representative? No. But at least this takes bias out. I'm not just asking my friends. I'm not just asking the people in my hallway. I'm not just asking the people I'm near. I'm not just asking people who volunteer, because we know that introduces bias. I'm asking people truly randomly. And we page them down and say, hey, answer these questions. And I mean, obviously they could refuse, but it's not voluntary in the sense that they have to come to us, right? We're asking them. That is mostly how we aim. And I know I'm going on long here. We're almost done. What's the risk with this? The only risk with this would be what, do you think? Okay, you don't make them. You just ask them. But the thing is this. When you do a random sample, when you go up to somebody and ask them a question, most people answer. It's not like randomly calling. It's not like handing out a comment card. If you go up to somebody and say, hey, can I ask you 2 quick questions? Most people say, yeah, sure. Now, if it's like awful and you're like, can I ask you 2 questions, then 40 minutes later, then people will hate you. But if you just have 2 quick questions, by and large, when you go up to someone face to face and say, hey, what do you think of this? They'll say, how many cats do you have? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like ice cream? That's great. Thanks so much. People don't hate you for that. People like talking about the cats and ice cream. You found that inconvenient? All right, fair enough. All right, fair enough. The only thing I'd say is this. There is still a risk that you miss people. What if I pulled 100 random names out of a hat and I didn't get a single grade 9? It just happened that way. Is that possible? I can pull it again, but only if I'd been keeping track of that, right? Only if I'd thought to think about it. So stratified is like simple random, but first you divide people into groups. So what I would do is I would say maybe, I'm going to cut them up into not cut them up, but I'm going to put a hat of grade 9s, a hat of grade 10s, a hat of grade 11s, and a hat full of grade 12s, and I'm going to pick randomly from each of those hats. So then I know I'm going to have 25 grade 9s because I picked 25 grade 9s. I picked them randomly, and then I randomly picked 25 grade 10s. Then I randomly picked 25 grade 11s. Then I randomly picked 25 grade 12s. So I'm doing random picking, but first I'm cutting people up into groups. So I make sure that every group I want, I get. Again, I'm not cutting people up. That would really make them mad. So like, hi, can I ask you first a few questions? But first, that's not cool. Not cool. Right? So you could divide by grade, but you could also divide by class, right? Right? We could say divide by class and pick 2 people randomly from each. Right? And that way you'd know you have a good mix of all the different classes in the school, right? You could just do it this way, all the grade 9s, all the grade 10s, all the grade 11s, all the grade 12s. You can do it a lot of different ways. But if you cut people into groups and then randomly pick, and this is what the professionals do, all right? When professionals do a poll, they do it this way. Yeah, they pick randomly, but they pick randomly making sure they hit all the major groups they want to get. And that's the gold standard, the biggie. That's the way you want to do it. And then the last example sucks, and I only include it because it's named specifically in the curriculum, but I'm going to tell you right now, this is terrible. This is where you divide into groups. And ask only one of those groups. So that would be like coming into Eastdale and asking one whole class and hoping that that represented the whole school. There's times when it's the thing to do, but it's by and large frowned upon. It's not considered a good idea. The classic example is they always say, like, well, you could go to one page in the phone book and like just ask everyone on that page. That would be like cluster sampling, right? Instead of picking randomly through the whole phone book, what if we just turn to one page and said I'm going to call everyone on that phone book? Well, the problem is if you did that and somebody has a big family, like if there's 18 Orlandos on that page, you've now asked my whole family, but we've asked no one from your family, no one from your family. Well, is it likely that maybe my whole family have kind of a collective set of things we feel similarly about? Sure, right? So it's kind of a bad idea for that. And in some towns, like, I don't know, I went to Eden in St. Catharines, and Eden has a big like Mennonite population. And so this is true. In my class was smaller. Do you guys know off the top of your hand how many kids will graduate with your graduating class? Are you like 70 something or 80 something? Yeah. Like next year when you graduate, how many kids will walk across? Because I think Eastdale's about 70, give or take. And that's similar. When I was in high school, it was 67. My graduating class was 67 kids. And 13 of them have the last name Weitz. And 8 of them have the last name Jansen. Weitz, W-E-I-N-S. It's a good like German Mennonite last name. And half of them weren't even related to each other. I know a girl, Adri Jansen with a Z, who married a guy named Tom Jansen with an S. So when like she got married, she changed her last name. The Z became an S, and that was it. No relation between them, they just have the same last name. They can prove the guy to say it. So cluster sampling is a bad idea. So there you go. The rest of the questions on here are for you to work out yourself. Go through and do them. We'll take them up tomorrow. And I think I threw one trigonometry question at the end, just to make sure we're not forgetting trigonometry exists. Yeah, give me a second. I'm just going to stop the recording, and then I'll put it on whatever you want.
Can I scream hi and we'll do this?
Yes, yeah, go.
Hello!
There you go. That's
Kyle Kerrigan.